Hey music lovers, I'm Tim Nichols and I am Generation X. I'm a Christian and I'm a metalhead, and today I want to talk to you about what is known as the Satanic Panic and its influence on Christian music. If you're Generation X like myself, you remember when the Satanic Panic happened. You remember when parents all across America were in utter terror because there were satanic priests and satanic rituals and satanic abuse all over the place, and they were hiding in the darkness, ready to eat your souls. And even non-Christian parents like my own were affected by this, and it was pretty crazy. But in order to really kind of get an understanding of the Satanic Panic and how it affected Christian music, we have to start in 1972. In 1972, there was a man by the name of Mike Warnke. Now, Mike Warnke was a Christian comedian that hit the ground running. He was actually kind of funny. I used to own a few of his albums, but he wrote a book called The Satan Seller, where he claimed that he was a satanic high priest and he had a coven with 1,500 members, and that he had this massive influence, and he was committing all of these sex acts with women and all of these ritual sacrifices and all these awful things, all in the name of Satanism. And what he would do is he would do his comedy bit, and at the end he would talk about this satanic influence that was trying to take over the world, that was infiltrating everything, that was infiltrating music, that was infiltrating the media, and it was infiltrating society as a whole, and we needed to be aware of it and to protect ourselves from it. And back then there was no such thing as Google. Research was pretty hard, so no one was really able to verify his claims, and churches all over America had him as their guest. And he spread these lies. He was not a satanic priest. He was never involved in Satanism. He made it all up. A journalist eventually ended up proving him to be an absolute fraud. But from 1972 until around 1979, Mike Warnke was a huge deal in the church. And he was spreading this fear of Satanism and trying to steal our souls through our music, through our entertainment, through games, and through all sorts of things. It was like Satan was hiding in everything. And the really unfortunate reality of that is there is a lot of occultic things hidden within our games, within our cartoons, and within a lot of music. There's a lot of kind of covert satanic symbolism hidden within these things. And because of frauds like Mike Warnke, well, it ended up kind of making it all the laughing stock. And Satan ended up really actually winning in the midst of all that. But then we have to fast forward to 1980. And in 1980 is when a Canadian psychiatrist named Lawrence Pastor, I believe I said that right, met a woman named Michelle Smith. He became her therapist, and she was kind of fascinated with him and always calling him and hanging around with him. Well, they ended up developing a romantic relationship. And he did this really weird called recovered memory therapy on her. And together with Michelle, they wrote a book called Michelle Remembers. And it was talking about how she was raised by Satanists and all kinds of SA and different kinds of things that really were horrifying if it were to happen to a child. And naturally, it absolutely freaked people out. So by 1980, the Satanic Panic had reached a peak. Now, Christian music was kind of unaffected by the Satanic Panic. However, early on, there were some ideas that rock music was of the devil. So when we had those early pioneers like Petra and Rez Band and Larry Norman and Agape Band and some of those that started in the late 60s and moving into the 70s, they already had some resistance from the church because there were those that called it the root theory, that saying that the rock and roll beat had satanic and voodoo roots and you couldn't use it at all because it was satanic simply by its nature. So Christian music was really affected already even before the Satanic Panic kicked in. But then in 1982, there was a game that became really popular called Dungeons and Dragons. And there was this young man that committed suicide that played Dungeons and Dragons, and everyone thought that Dungeons and Dragons was evil and wicked and it was the cause for this. Now, I am a person that I believe people make their own moral decisions based on their own human brokenness and sin. However, I do believe that outside forces can contribute to that thinking system. If you listen to music with violence and you play games with spells and violence, I do believe it can have a negative effect on you, but I don't think they cause people to commit suicide. There was this advocacy group created after all this called BADD, B-A-D-D, and it was bothered about Dungeons and Dragons. And it was an advocacy group claiming it was tied to occultism and a suicide culture. And it really gave Dungeons and Dragons a really bad rap. Now, I want to give a disclaimer here. When you're casting spells and you're doing fake witchcraft, all that stuff is based off something very real, and I don't think Christians have any business dabbling in that. But I do think that this satanic panic and this satanic priest are everywhere, and we see the story of Michelle, we see the story of Mike Warnke, and it led to this absolute hysteria that really hit its peak between 1985 and 1988. This is when the Parents Music Resource Center was formed, and they began to question artists like Ozzy Osbourne, Judas Priest, and beyond about their satanic themes in their music. And this led to a 1988 Geraldo Rivera episode where he takes on Satanism. Oprah jumps in the fray, and the media dives in. The news is covering it, and the panic has ensued like mad. People are freaking out. My parents, who were not Christians, my mother came into my room and grabbed my Megadeth, my Metallica, my Black Sabbath, my Ozzy Osbourne cassettes, and she was about to throw them out before my dad intervened, and I was screaming at the top of my lungs. It was madness, and this was life for probably nearly every teenager that was Generation X that grew up as a teenager in the 80s into the 90s. Mike Warnke and Lawrence and Michelle Pazder ended up being complete frauds. This was all made up. There was nothing real about it. This whole entire panic was based on two stories that were disproven. There was no evidence to it. I encourage you to do your research on these and check them out. And what's really unfortunate is the effect that it had not only on rock music as a whole, but on Christian rock music. Because by the time the Satanic Panic hit and people were saying even the voodoo beat is in the rock music and the rock music is based on a satanic beat, that parents were even freaking out about Christian music. So instead of Christian music, especially Christian rock, being viewed as a safe alternative for parents, it was just kind of Satanism in disguise. And there were some bands that leaned into this as well. For example, Stryper and Bloodgood and so many others that really tried to become the anti-Satan music, and their symbology was sometimes really controversial. I'm reminded of the Stryper To Hell With the Devil album, where the cover was not sold in Christian bookstores simply because it had 3 shirtless angels with really big muscles throwing the devil into hell. While that probably complicated matters even further, it's really interesting what effect the Satanic Panic had on Christian music, because Christian kids were looking for alternates. Back in the late 60s and early 70s, it was kind of frowned upon. They weren't welcome in churches, but kids were finding refuge in Christian music. And by the mid-1980s, when the Satanic Panic was in full effect, Christian parents, even some, were leaning into some of these Christian rock bands, desperate for alternates for their kids. And that's when the thing exploded. Stryper became mainstream. Christian music was getting play on MTV and music radio and Headbangers Ball. All of a sudden, record labels began to recognize that Christian music was a cash cow. But again, so many in the church doubled down that rock music in and of itself was evil. The lyrics don't matter. It's all about the beat. It belongs to Satan. That's his music. This is all utterly ridiculous, of course. But it didn't stop people from panicking over this thing, and it's spilling over even into Christian rock music. So fast forward to 1990, by the time all of this stuff had been fully exposed as fraudulent, but the church hadn't caught up to it. Even in the mid-90s, I heard of an evangelist named Eric Barger who preached that rock music was of the devil, and there's no such thing as the ability to have Christian rock music. And of course, in 1989, Reel to Reel Ministries released a documentary called Hell's Bells, The Real Dangers to Rock Music. And they talked about the Satanism that is within rock music. And I'm going to say this, there are some satanic images and lyrics in a lot of rock music. Some of it is just artists trying to make money and leaning into the hysteria, but some of it I do believe was legitimate. The problem with Reel to Reel Ministries is they also included Christian rock in this, and they really, even to this day, really have a negative and kind of dangerous and divisive view of Christian rock music. I don't believe all Christian rock music is the same. I believe the lyrics need to be clear and obvious, and I believe the band members need to be living for Jesus. And a lot of times, that's not the case. A lot of times the lyrics are unclear and the band members are not even living for Christ. But there are also some really good guys out there and gals that love the Lord, that are playing their rock music, and their lyrics are clear, and they're really putting out a great message, but they still get resistance because of this whole idea of rock music is evil, and the Satanic Panic fueled that. Now, what's really interesting is the effect it had on Christian rock music in the mid-80s into the 90s, and that is that it brought it into the spotlight a little bit more. And record labels began to buy into this, and they began to gain popularity. As I said earlier, they were getting play on MTV and everything else, but it also raised the level of scrutiny. And churches began to ban these bands and would not support them and would not promote them and would not let them play. It's wild. If you've never watched the Bloodgood documentary, which I can't remember the name, but I'll put that down here at the bottom of the video, you need to check that out because it really gives you an idea of how resisted rock music was simply because of the beat and the sound. People just automatically thought it was satanic, and the Satanic Panic really helped fuel that as well. So fast forward into the 90s, and then that's when record labels started to catch on that if we want to gain mainstream popularity, we're going to have to play more mainstream music. And Christian rock was kind of put in the background, and then what became Christian contemporary music rose to the forefront, and that's how we ended up with the bubblegummy, generic, boring music that gets radio play but has no real substance, and it all virtually sounds the same. And it's really disappointing because if you look behind the curtain, those that are signed to major record deals, many of those bands are no better than the world. We have the Michael Tate and the Newsboys situation and beyond that has permeated that industry. And there are Christian musicians blowing the whistle all over the place about how wicked and evil that industry has become. And it's all super unfortunate because what's supposed to be light actually has a little bit of tarnish on it. So my hope is that Christian musicians regain their footing. They regain their sanctification and their desire to serve Jesus and to be pure. And once again, Christian music becomes that beacon of hope for young people that it was way back when the Jesus movement started and we enjoyed our Jesus music before record labels, before the Satanic Panic. Yes, it got its own set of resistances, but there was something pure about it. I'm thankful for the effect that the Satanic Panic had on Christian music because I believe it brought bands to the forefront that would have never existed because they came into play to be the counter movement of Satanism and really let Christianity shine bright. I think of bands like Barren Cross that are in that Iron Maiden vein. I think of bands like Stryper, bands like Bloodgood, and bands like Audio Adrenaline. So many that really meet this different need. And it's like, I wonder if there are bands that sound like such and such band, but they don't have that satanic message, whether it's intended to be a joke or whether it's intended to be serious. But anyhow, those are my thoughts on the Satanic Panic and how it affected Christian rock music. God bless you. Keep calm. Jesus on.